Have you ever heard a ghost in the machine? Not, a real ghost, but that really strange feeling you get when you hear something in the background noise of your life. Something that just can't possibly be there.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're in the shower, completely alone, and you would swear on your life you just heard your phone buzzing on the counter. So you hop out, dripping water everywhere, only to check it and find nothing. Not a single notification.
Or how about this one? It's late at night, you've got a fan running for some white noise, and all of a sudden, inside that whirring sound, you can just make out what sounds like a distant conversation, or maybe a radio playing.
Well, that whole experience, it has a name. It's called auditory pareidolia. And what's really wild is that this isn't a sign that your brain is malfunctioning. Nope. It's actually proof that it's working exactly the way it's supposed to. It's a feature, not a bug.
Okay, so let's dig into this. Let's put a proper name to these phantom sounds and figure out what's really going on.
So what is the difference between this and, say, a hallucination? Well, the key is that auditory pareidolia needs a real external sound to work its magic. It's all about your brain finding a pattern inside of random noise. A true hallucination, on the other hand, can happen in total silence. For pareidolia, the fan has to be on for you to hear those voices in it.
And it turns out our brains have a favorite type of noise to play with. It just loves continuous broadband noise. Sounds that have a whole mix of different frequencies. Things like the hum of an air conditioner, the rush of a shower, or that static from an old radio that isn't tuned to a station, they're all perfect canvases. Oh, and that loop effect in your sleep app? Your brain is a master at detecting patterns. Once it notices that short, repeating loop of sound, it starts trying to complete it, and that often means creating a little phantom melody that isn't really there.
Right, so we know what it is, but how in the world does a simple mechanical hum get turned into a whole conversation inside our heads? The answer is pretty mind-bending. We usually think of our ears like microphones, and our brain as some kind of recording device, just passively taking in whatever's happening around us. But that's not right at all. Your brain is an active participant in this whole process. It's constantly building a model of the world and making predictions about what it expects to hear next. This whole process is called predictive coding. So first, your brain predicts. Based on your entire life of listening to people talk, it creates a sort of template for what a voice sounds like. Then it compares. It listens to the random noise from the fan and checks it against that voice template. Now, in all that chaos, it's guaranteed to find a few tiny little sound waves that kind of sort of match its prediction. And finally, it resolves. It makes a decision. It locks onto those matches, cranks up their volume, and just filters out everything else that doesn't fit the pattern.
I love this way of thinking about it. The voice isn't being made out of thin air. It was always there, sort of potentially, as just a random blip in the noise. Your brain is like a sculptor that comes along and finds it, chiseling away all the irrelevant static to reveal the shape it was expecting to find all along.
And that brings us to the really big question. Why? Why would our brains evolve to have such a weird, error-prone system? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. It was all about keeping us alive. So let me introduce you to a core piece of your brain's software, the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HADD. This is basically our brain's built-in instinct to assume that any weird, ambiguous sound or sight is caused by something with a mind of its own, an agent. Back in our evolutionary past, the most important things to notice were other agents, right? Like predators, rivals, prey, or potential mates. Just look at the evolutionary math here. Imagine one of our ancestors hears a rustle in the grass. If they assume it's a predator, but it's really just the wind, that's a false alarm. Okay, so they waste a little energy running away. No big deal. But what if they assume it's just the wind, when it's actually a predator? That's a miss. And the cost of a miss is, well, death. The cost of a false alarm is basically zero. So natural selection, like a ruthless accountant, favored the brains that made thousands of false alarms just to avoid one single fatal miss. So that phantom voice you hear in the fan, that's a cognitive echo of this ancient survival strategy. It's just your brain, hardwired for caution, choosing to make a safe mistake. We are literally the direct descendants of the ancestors who were jumpy, cautious, and maybe just a little bit paranoid. But this deep-seated neurological quirk doesn't just keep us safe. It has had a profound impact on our culture, our beliefs, and our search for meaning in the great unknown.
Take, for instance, electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. This is the practice of trying to find voices of the dead in audio static. What practitioners often do is use devices that scan through radio stations really, really fast, which creates this perfect storm of white noise and tiny random fragments of speech.
This is auditory pareidolia in its purest form. I mean, when you are actively hoping and expecting to hear a message from a loved one, your brain's predictive coding system just goes into overdrive. It takes those random syllables, those bits of static, and guided by your own hope and desire, it stitches them together into words that can feel incredibly profound and meaningful.
And this brings up a really fascinating question. From a neurological standpoint, are people who are really good at finding EVPs, are they simply people whose brains are exceptionally good at this pattern matching game? Are they, in a way, expert listeners, just finely tuned to find the signal in the noise?
Now, while this is usually a totally harmless quirk, it does exist on a spectrum. So let's take a moment to clarify the difference between this very common experience and other more clinical conditions. This is super important, if only for peace of mind.
Really, the biggest difference between all of these is insight. With benign pareidolia, you know it's just the fan making a weird noise. But with a psychotic hallucination, that insight is gone. The voice is perceived as 100% real. And then you have something in the middle called musical ear syndrome, which is often tied to hearing loss. That's where the brain is so starved for sound that it just starts making up its own music to fill the silence.
So, what can you do if this experience is ever causing you stress? Well, a lot of the time, simply understanding the science, just knowing it's a brain trick, is enough to take away the fear. You can also just change the sound source. Sometimes even just changing the speed of the fan is enough to break the pattern. And for conditions like musical ear syndrome, things like hearing aids can work wonders by giving the brain some real sound to focus on again.
When it comes right down to it, hearing voices in the noise isn't a glitch at all. It's the signature of a brain so exquisitely designed for finding other people, for detecting other minds, for social connection, that it sometimes finds them even where they don't exist. Your brain would rather make a false positive for connection than sit with the silence of being truly alone.
And that leaves us with one last, big, thought-provoking question. We've just talked about how our brains are actively building what we hear, filtering and sculpting reality for a very specific purpose. Now, if that's true for sound, what else are we sculpting? If our entire perception is really just a beautiful, useful illusion that's built for survival, what does that say about the nature of reality itself?